In 1923, a Sicilian seamstress named Rosa Marino lived in a two-room tenement on Mulberry Street in Lower Manhattan. Her husband laid bricks for $18 a week. They had 5 children. They paid $11 a month in rent. They sent $4 every Friday to her mother-in-law in Palermo. And on what was left, Rosa fed 7 people on roughly 50 cents a day. Not 50 cents per person. 50 cents total. Her husband carried a packed lunch the Irish bricklayers admitted smelled better than what they bought. When Rosa died in 1971, her granddaughter found a small leather notebook in a tin behind the stove. Inside were 38 handwritten rules in Italian. Most had never been spoken aloud. They were never supposed to leave the kitchen. They lived differently. Not because they were poor, though they were, but because they carried a code from the old country that refused to bend in the new one. That code stretched a bricklayer's wage into a household, a savings account, and a remittance to the village all at once. We watched it work for 40 years and called it quaint. We replaced it with credit and called it progress. Most of it died with them. Number 22 cost absolutely nothing and reduced a tenement family's annual food spending by an estimated $48, the equivalent of 2 months of rent. Number 14 was so unfashionable by 1965 that Italian-American daughters refused to teach it to their own children, and modern accountants now say it outperforms zero-based budgeting. And number 3, the single rule every Italian wife enforced without exception, the one no neighbor was ever allowed to witness, kept 3 generations financially solvent on wages that should have made it mathematically impossible. These 25 tricks were not about being poor. They were about looking like you were not. They were the difference between a family that built a future on the Lower East Side and one that returned to Italy in shame. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 25 secret penny-stretching tricks Italian immigrants used to live on 50 cents a day in 1920s New York. Number 25. The Sunday sauce that lasted 4 days. A pot of sugo started Sunday morning and fed the family until Wednesday night. You simmered tomatoes, a single bone, garlic, and basil for 6 hours. The sauce served pasta on Sunday, ribollita with stale bread on Monday, baked over polenta on Tuesday, and stretched into a soup with beans on Wednesday. Total cost was roughly 14 cents. The bone was free from the butcher who knew you. For Rosa Marino, the pot did not just feed 7 people. It bought her back 4 hours of her week. By 1928, the Sunday pot was so common on Mulberry Street that a butcher near Grand Street kept a barrel of soup bones marked for the Italians. No charge. The pot was not a meal. The pot was a work week made edible. Number 24. The bread heel currency. No heel of bread was ever thrown away. Stale ends went into a cloth bag hung behind the stove. By Friday, the bag held enough for breadcrumbs, panzanella, or pasta e pane. You toasted the heels low and slow, then crushed them with a glass bottle. A family in East Harlem in 1924 saved an estimated $7 a year on breadcrumbs alone. That was a week of rent. The Italian grandmother who threw away bread was a grandmother who had forgotten what hunger sounded like in a Sicilian village in 1898. None of them had forgotten. The heel was not garbage. The heel was tomorrow's lunch in disguise. Number 23. The window garden. Every tenement window held a clay pot. Basil, oregano, parsley, sometimes a tomato vine trained up a string. A woman on Elizabeth Street in 1925 grew enough basil from 3 windowsill pots to season her family's food for 8 months a year. The cost of seeds was 4 cents. Replacement cost at the pushcart was roughly $3.20 across the season. You watered the pots with leftover pasta water. The window was not decoration. The window was a pharmacy and a pantry that paid rent in flavor. The pot on the sill was not pretty. The pot on the sill was the cheapest grocery store in Manhattan. Number 22, the communal oven trick. Tenement apartments had small stoves and limited coal, so Italian wives on Mott Street pooled their baking. One woman fired her oven on Tuesday and baked for 4 families. The next Tuesday, another woman did the same. Coal cost was divided 4 ways. Bread cost was cut by 75%. A family of 7 in 1923 spent roughly 9 cents a week on bread instead of 36 cents. Across a year, that saved $14, the equivalent of 2 months of rent. The neighbors formed a financial network that ran on trust and turn-taking, and a woman who skipped her week of baking would not be invited back. The system policed itself. It was not generosity. It was infrastructure built between strangers who had crossed the same ocean. Number 21, the reused cooking water. Pasta water was never poured down the drain. You poured it into a jar, let it cool, and you used it to water the window plants. Bean water became the base for the next day's minestrone. Vegetable boiling water flavored bread dough. Rosa Marino estimated she used every quart of water in her kitchen at least twice. The savings were not in the water. The savings were in the broth, the soup base, the dough, the herbs that grew taller because of it. Her basil pots, fed on pasta water, produced leaves so large the neighbors asked what she was doing. She would not tell them. The water was not waste. The water was a second ingredient hiding inside the first. Number 20, the coat lining repair. When a man's wool coat began to wear at the elbows, his wife did not buy a new one. She turned the coat inside out, restitched the lining, and patched the elbows with felt cut from a worn-out hat. A bricklayer's coat in 1924 cost $18 new. A relining cost roughly 40 cents and one Saturday afternoon. That coat lasted another 4 winters. Across a working life, the savings exceeded $60, a down payment on a small piece of land in Calabria. Some men used it for exactly that. Others used it to bring a son across the ocean. The coat was not patched. The coat was a man's pride, being defended 1 stitch at a time. Number 19, the pushcart negotiation hour. Italian wives did not shop at the pushcarts in the morning. They shopped at 6 in the evening when the vendors were exhausted. The produce was beginning to turn, and a hard bargain meant the difference between a sale and the trash. You walked the row twice before buying. You let the vendor see you walking away. A woman on Hester Street in 1925 bought a basket of slightly bruised tomatoes for 8 cents that had been priced at 22 cents that morning. She made sauce that night. Bruises did not survive the simmer. The pushcart men knew exactly what was happening. They respected it. The bruise was not damage. The bruise was a 60% discount the morning shoppers never saw. Number 18, the wine in the bathtub. Every fall, Italian families on Mulberry Street bought grape lugs from California crates. $12 bought 200 pounds of grapes. The bathtub became the press. You crushed the grapes by foot, drained the must into oak barrels stored in the cellar, and let the wine ferment through November. The result was 50 gallons of homemade wine for the year. A bottle at a speakeasy in 1925 cost roughly 80 cents. Home wine cost about 5 cents a bottle. A family saved an estimated $90, more than 2 months of a bricklayer's wages. The Volstead Act had carved out an exemption for fruit juice for personal use. Every Italian household had read the loophole. The bathtub was not for bathing in October. The bathtub was a winery the federal government pretended not to see. Here is what no one explains about the Italian immigrant code. These women were not running households. They were running small economies. Every decision was a transaction with three parties: the family in New York, the family back in Italy, and the future the wages were quietly building toward. The pasta water was reused because nothing in that economy was allowed to go to waste. The coat was relined because a new coat was a missed remittance, a delayed land purchase, a sister back home who would not be sent for. American observers saw thrift. Italian wives saw arithmetic. The numbers had to balance every week in three currencies: dollars, lira, and a third currency no economist tracked: the dignity of arriving in church on Sunday looking like a family that did not need help. Dignity was not pride. Dignity was working capital. Number 17. The Sunday suit inheritance. A man owned one good suit. When his oldest son turned 14, the suit was tailored down and given to the boy. The father bought a new one, used from a Bowery resale shop, for $4. A new department store suit cost $18. Across one generation, the inheritance trick saved roughly $42, the cost of a steamship ticket from Naples in third class. More than one family used the savings for exactly that. The father said one sentence to the boy: "This is what a man wears. Take care of it." The boy understood. The suit was not handed down. The suit was a brother arriving in New York. Number 16. The Holy Card Ledger. Italian wives kept household accounts on the back of holy cards from the parish. St. Anthony was on the front, and household expenses were recorded on the back. A woman on Spring Street in 1924 logged every penny using roughly 30 cards a year, kept in a small wooden box on the kitchen shelf. The system was free. The cards were handed out at Mass. The discipline was total. The husband never asked to see them. The wife never offered. The cards were the truth, kept where the saints could witness it. The card was not a budget. The card was a confession the parish never read. Number 15. The Boarder Room. Almost every Italian family on Mulberry Street rented a corner of a room to a single male boarder, usually a paesano from the same village. The rate was $3 a week, including dinner. The income covered roughly 70% of the family's rent. The boarder kept a cot behind a hung sheet. He left when he had saved enough to send for his own wife. In 1923, a family with one boarder cleared an extra $156 a year. That was almost a year of food. When he started his own household, he often took a boarder of his own, and the cycle continued for another decade. The boarder was not a tenant. The boarder was a wage the family had grown inside its own walls. Number 14. The Invisible Patch. When clothing tore, the patch went on the inside, not the outside. A skilled Italian seamstress could repair a child's school dress so the mend was invisible from 3 feet away. The dress went to school looking new. You worked the patch from underneath, matching thread color exactly, taking stitches so small they disappeared into the weave. A woman on Mott Street in 1925 estimated that invisible patching extended children's clothing by a full year on average, saving $11 per child annually. With 5 children, that was $55 a year, 2 months of rent. By 1965, Italian-American daughters were refusing to learn the technique. The mothers were not insulted. They had won. The point of the invisible patch had always been that the daughter would never need it. The patch was not visible. That was the entire point. Number 13. The fish head stock. When the fishmonger on Elizabeth Street threw fish heads into a barrel at the end of the day, Italian wives took them home for free. The heads simmered with onion, celery, and water into a broth that became the base for risotto, soup, and Friday's pasta. A family of 7 ate seafood-flavored meals 4 nights a week for the cost of nothing. The fishmonger, a Calabrian named Vincenzo Russo, who ran a stall on Elizabeth Street from 1919 to 1948, eventually started saving the heads in a separate barrel marked for regular Italian customers. He understood whose loyalty paid his bills. The head was not waste. The head was Friday dinner sitting in a barrel by the curb. Number 12, the coal stove schedule. A 1920s tenement coal stove was lit at 5 in the morning and kept burning until 10 at night. Every cooking task was scheduled around the same fire. Bread baked in the morning heat, sauce simmered through the afternoon, soup at night, coffee on the dying coals at bedtime. A family in East Harlem in 1924 burned roughly half the coal of a comparable Irish family on the same block. Annual savings were $18. An inspector for the New York Tenement House Department noted in 1926 that Italian apartments stayed warmer on less coal than any other immigrant group in the city. He never figured out why. The stove was not a tool. The stove was a discipline measured in lumps of coal. Number 11, the borrowed sewing machine. A treadle sewing machine in 1923 cost $32, nearly 2 weeks of a bricklayer's wages. So Italian wives on Mulberry Street rotated a single machine through 4 households. Each woman had it for 1 week a month. The cost was split 4 ways, $8 per family. Annual savings per family were an estimated $34. The machine moved between apartments by handcart, often pushed by a teenage son after school. A 1924 settlement house worker on Elizabeth Street called the practice an extraordinary cooperative arrangement conducted entirely without legal instrument. She did not understand the legal instrument was the village. The machine was not borrowed. The machine was a cooperative business with no signage and no paperwork. Number 10. The lard bucket. Every drop of cooking fat was saved. A tin bucket sat next to the stove. Bacon grease, chicken fat, beef drippings, all of it went in. The accumulated fat fried the next week's onions, sealed the crust on Sunday's bread, and greased the cake pan on a feast day. Replacement cost of equivalent fat at the grocer was roughly $9 a year. A grandmother on Carmine Street in 1926 told her granddaughter the bucket was the most important object in the kitchen. The granddaughter forgot. Most of them forgot. The grease was not garbage. The grease was butter the family had refused to pay for. Number 9. The Saints' Day Feast Trick. Italian families threw enormous Saints' Day feasts that looked expensive but were not. The trick was simple. Every neighbor brought a dish. The host family provided only the bread and the wine, both made at home. A feast for 20 in 1925 cost the host family roughly 60 cents. The same feast, if catered, would have cost $14. The Feast of San Gennaro on Mulberry Street, which began in 1926, was originally organized on exactly this principle. Every household contributed 1 dish, and no family was ever shamed for what it could afford. Outsiders saw a festival. The neighborhood saw a balance sheet that fed everyone. The feast was not generosity. The feast was a network paying its dues in food. In 1925, the average Italian immigrant family on the Lower East Side saved roughly 22% of its income, a higher rate than any other ethnic group in New York. They earned less. They saved more. By 1980, the saving rate of their grandchildren had fallen to 7%. The income had tripled. The discipline had collapsed. We did not become more prosperous. We became convinced that the old way was a memory of poverty rather than a method of escape from it. The grandmothers who lived through both eras never understood the change. They had inherited a system that worked. The grandchildren inherited one that did not. Number 8. The repaired shoe. Children's shoes were resoled, never replaced, until the upper finally cracked. The cobbler on Mott Street charged 25 cents per resole. A new pair of children's shoes cost $1.80. Across 5 children and a school year, the savings exceeded $20. You took the shoes in on Saturday morning and picked them up Saturday evening. The cobbler repaired the same pairs for years, watching feet grow until the shoes could no longer be passed down to a younger sibling. The shoe was not the savings. The shoe was the cobbler being trusted with the family's arithmetic. Number 7. The grocery credit refusal. Italian wives paid cash at the grocer, always. The Irish and German families on the same block ran tabs that compounded into trouble by Christmas. The Italian wives watched it happen and did not learn the wrong lesson. A grocer on Bleecker Street in 1924 said the Italian women were the only customers who never owed him a dime by year's end. He gave them better produce because of it. He saved the early tomatoes for them. It was not pride. It was a refusal that paid in fresher tomatoes. Number 6. The dowry savings jar. Every Italian household with a daughter kept a small ceramic jar in a cupboard. Pennies, nickels, and the occasional quarter went in. By the time the daughter married, the jar held enough for linens, furniture, and a wedding feast. A jar started at the daughter's birth in 1908 typically held $180 by 1928. The jar was untouchable. Even in the worst week, when the bricklayer was laid off, when the coal ran out, no one reached for it. The jar belonged to a future person. That person had a name. The jar was not savings. The jar was a daughter's future, sealed in clay. Number 5. The sent-home remittance. $4 left the household every Friday. It went to Palermo, Naples, or Calabria, to a mother, a sister, or a village priest. The money was sent before rent, before food, before anything else. A family in 1923 sent roughly $208 home a year, nearly a third of the husband's wages. It was not charity. It was a debt of honor. By 1924, Italian remittances from American immigrants accounted for nearly 1% of Italy's GDP. Entire villages in Sicily and Calabria were rebuilt with the dollars sent from Mulberry Street. The remittance was not a gift. The remittance was a country being held together across an ocean. Number 4. The workshop in the kitchen. When the bricklayer came home, he did not rest. He repaired shoes, sharpened knives, mended chairs, and built small wooden boxes that his wife sold on Saturday mornings for 10 cents each. A family in 1924 brought in roughly $18 a year from the husband's evening side work. That was a month of food. After 8 in the evening, the kitchen was not a kitchen. The kitchen became a second workshop hidden behind a curtain. The children learned by watching. By age 12, an eldest son could repair a chair, sharpen a blade, and build a small box from scrap wood. This workshop was not a hobby. It was the second income. America thought immigrants did not have. Number 3. The invisible wealth rule. No Italian family on Mulberry Street displayed money. The successful tailor wore the same suit as the struggling laborer. The wife of a man who had quietly saved $1,200 wore the same wool shawl she had owned for 9 years. A grandmother on Spring Street in 1926 explained it to her granddaughter with a single phrase: "Se sanno, vogliono." If they know, they will want. The rule was enforced more strictly than any other. Quiet wealth was protected wealth. The grandmother who taught that phrase died in 1962 with $14,000 in a passbook account no one in her building knew existed. Her funeral was paid in cash from a tin behind the icebox. It was not modesty. It was a fortress built out of the appearance of poverty. Number 2. The daughter's notebook. Before a daughter married, her mother gave her a small notebook. Inside, in the mother's handwriting, were the rules: how to set the Sunday pot, how to read a butcher, how to stretch a wage, how to send the remittance without telling the husband what it had cost the household, how to keep the dowry jar untouched. The notebook was the inheritance. It was worth more than any furniture. The daughter who lost the notebook lost the system. Most did not lose it. Many still exist in attics in Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island. Almost none have been translated. The notebook was not paper. The notebook was a mother handing her daughter a working economy. Number 1. Spend less than you earn. That is the whole rule. No window garden, no pasta water, no invisible patch. None of the 24 tricks above mean anything without this one beneath them. Rosa Marino's husband earned $18 a week. The household spent $13 a week. The $5 gap, defended every Friday for 31 years, paid the rent, fed 7 people, sent $4 to Palermo, married off 3 daughters with full dowry jars, and bought a small 2-family house in Brooklyn in 1948. There was no trick beneath it. There was a gap. Rosa held the gap open for 3 decades, and the gap built everything. It is the most boring sentence in any language. It is also the sentence the immigrant grandmothers of New York used to build a generation that never went hungry. None of these tricks required English. None of them required citizenship, a bank account, or a financial advisor. They required a woman willing to run a small economy out of 2 rooms in 3 currencies, with no one in America fully understanding what she was doing. The Italian wives of the 1920s in New York were not frugal. They were strategists. They had crossed an ocean, learned a city, and built a system that fed 7 people on what their American neighbors spent on coffee and cigarettes. They did it without complaint and almost without witness. They did it so well that their grandchildren grew up in suburbs and assumed the prosperity had simply arrived. It had not arrived. It had been built quietly in tenement kitchens on the backs of holy cards by women whose names appear in no history book. We called them old country. We called them out of touch. They were neither. The tricks died in attics. The math did not. The math is still waiting in the kitchen on the back of a holy card for anyone willing to do what Rosa Marino did at the kitchen table on a Friday night in 1923, count the money, set aside the gap, and refuse to let it close.